Hello, and you're live on GBC 24 coming to you from Broadcasting House here in Accra. You're welcome once again, and as we do it here on Women's Voice, we talk about issues that affect women, especially issues in relation to the home, children, and families as well. You're welcome once again, and I'm Selikem Akolache Apalu. Today, we're talking about homeschooling. For many parents, sending children off to school is the norm and the regular practice. But for others, it is possible to put their children through school at home under their own terms. The question is, why would parents not send their children into the usual structured system of education? Is homeschooling the solution to the failings of our regular school system? Today on Women's Voice, we seek to understand how homeschooling works here in Ghana. We're discussing homeschooling as an alternative to regular school. In the studio today are members of the Homeschooling Association in the country, and they all homeschool their children, and they are here to share their experience with us. Seated next to me is Mana Teki Myers. She is a herbal therapist and CEO of H&H Solutions at East Lagos. You're welcome. Thanks for being here today. And also with her is Dr. Obadele Kambon. He is a research fellow at the Literature and Drama section of the Institute of African Studies, also joining us today. Thank you so much for being here. So first of all, let's establish the idea behind homeschooling. I'll start with you, Doc.
Well, there's actually a lot of background for homeschooling, specifically coming out of the U.S., that for some time now, Africans, people of African descent, have felt that the schools have not served our best interests in various ways through not being told about our history, being lied to about our history, basically the starting of our history at enslavement, that it left a lot to be desired, to put it very mildly. So in the 1960s, you had African-centered schools being started, independent institutions, and you had organizations like the Council of Independent Black Institutions that were set up for young children to be able to learn from a perspective that not only taught them about themselves but also celebrated themselves. If you go to regular school, you may not find out that it was African people who developed things like geometry, trigonometry, algebra, all of these things in things like the Ishango bone, the Bombo bone, going back 20 and 30,000 years. You wouldn't learn about African people like Imhotep, who were the first architects and the first physicians on the planet. The first book ever written was the Instructions of Ptah-hotep, also coming out of the Nile Valley. So even though those who set up the school system know about these things because they're in their museums in London and the Louvre, etc., when they set up the school system for you, they don't tell you about them. Why? Well, this is where we come to intentionality. Those who plan on enslaving you and colonizing you will not tell you things that would make you say, oh, well, if I've done all of these great things in the past, it means that I should be able to do them now and in the future. So a lot of the intent for the schooling system is not to liberate us or to make us be able to really achieve our true potential. It's more so to support the structures as they are and to keep those relations as they are. So a lot of the ideological basis and foundation is that we should have an alternative that would enrich us and that we will be able to truly give our children an alternative so that they can reach their best potential.
But in this same vein, as you speak about it, for those who do not homeschool their children will still lose out to some extent as Africans. So it's not about us as Africans trying to make sure that we stamp our voice in there, in the mainstream education system, instead of just saying, okay, let's homeschool our kids.
This is actually something that's been tried and is still being tried up to this point in time. So anytime you have a question like this, you can look at what happened the last 1,000 times that we've attempted to do this, and then we can start to proceed intelligently in order to, move forward. So as we've seen in various school districts, and again, I would appeal to the U.S. situation, there was a debate about whether or not we should be able to teach our children in Ebonics, which is basically structurally like African languages, even though a lot of the lexicon and vocabulary comes from English. And this was a whole, knock down, drag down thing. Up to this date, they're still teaching children that Columbus discovered America, whereas lots of evidence, including huge stone heads, show that Africans had traveled to places where they interacted with the Olmec people. So this is before Columbus, and there's literature that came before Columbus, African presence in early Americas, that you would never, learn this type of thing. And then when you push to put it in there, you get a lot of pushback. So up to this point in time, a lot of this information has been out there for decades and decades and decades, and we've agitated in order to try to get it into that curriculum. And myself, right now I'm a research fellow. I teach at University of Ghana at Legon, and I do a test. Before we start off, I say, how many people have heard of Imhotep? No hands. How many people have heard of Ptahhotep, the one who wrote the first book in the history of all humanity? No hands. I go through Queen Nzinga, no hands. How many people have heard of Pihanki, Taharka, Amos, these great military leaders? No hands. Narmer, no hands. So then I say, okay, all right, now I've given you about 50 no hands of the most important human beings who ever walked the face of the planet. The person who wrote the first book, I think that's pretty important. The first major stone structure, I think that's pretty important. The first physician known to humanity is pretty important. But then I say, okay, how many people have heard of Aristotle? All hands. This is here in Ghana. How many people have heard of Plato? All hands. Shakespeare? All hands. Queen Victoria? All hands. So that in and of itself is an indictment of the system that was set up. And again, we have to go to the intent. Those who set up this educational system, for what purpose did they do it? When they were colonizing Ghana and they intended on stealing all of the resources without having any accountability towards the people here, were they saying, oh, well, let's be sure to teach them all of this information that we know, so that they would say, let's get rid of these colonials? That's not their intent. So when we look at the structure of itself, it is designed to keep you in a particular position. And up to this date, as I'm doing this test in class, I see very job well done. It's doing just what it was intended to do.
Okay, I'm sure the people who are watching you talking and they're saying, okay, this guy's accent, this man's accent already does not sound as African as me, and they want to know where you're coming from to even be talking about Africa. So I'll come back to you to understand your roots as well. But let me come to you, Mana. For you, what's the idea behind homeschooling?
Okay, I was talking to you earlier, and I mentioned that my intention was not from Obadana's perspective from beginning. I didn't know so many things myself, but it was from a bad experience in taking my first child to school, and I realized that in the school, when he didn't do well, or when any of the pupils didn't do well, they were hooted at. And so this child
In the school?
Yes. So if you are asked to point at one and you didn't, and your fellow student is able, they clap for the student and they shame you. And so I think he was hating, to learn, because he was growing up hating to learn. So every time he comes home and I try to teach him certain things, he was somehow rebelling. If I point at one a million times and I tell him to point at one, he will point at 4. And at a point, I thought he probably had a learning disability. So we wanted to take him to, specialists and all that to see, what we could do. I tried putting him in other schools, and when I go there, I spend the whole day there just trying to observe how he's able to merge with the other students to learn. And when they put him in class and, he was being taught, it was the same thing, he would do with the teacher. The teacher would point at A, like how many times, using all kinds of ways, learning through play, whatever. He just wouldn't, show you.
So the first bad experience sort of gave him a certain idea about education.
Yeah, so he basically hated to be in school, because when it was playtime, he was the first to go out and he was all over happy and everything. But the moment they call them back in school, he calls up. So I was like, no, I have to, take this on myself. So I decided to put him home and try to teach him. And it was hell. It was, very frustrating and all that. So at a point I was so sure, I told myself, this boy have a learning disability. But I talked to someone, the person said, just keep on doing what you're doing. I think in one of the schools, I put him at East Legon. The headmistress also suggested, okay, you've started, so you keep on and see how it will be. Then after a year, I realized that this boy was doing very well. At age 5, he was reading. He was basically reading, like when you gave him graphic, he would read. He was doing very well. And I was at the same time teaching him, and
So you were doing the teaching yourself?
I was doing the teaching myself. Then I started because I was somehow working. So sometimes, it wasn't too conducive. So I said, okay, I had to stop working and just dedicate myself to him. So I started something on my own, and that's on my porch. So that was his classroom, and that was where I was meeting my clients as well. So at a point, I realized that I was getting interrupted, because when people come to see me, I had to stop teaching him to deal with them. So then I brought in a teacher, to help. And that was with my instruction, what I want him to teach. So if I get a client come, then I will give him instructions, on what to do. So when I'm done, then I join the class. So that is how it's been up until now. So now I still go to my office, leave instructions. So I spend half of my day at home, making sure that the teacher is doing the right thing to a certain point. Then I give instructions, then I go to work.
Okay, I'll come back to you to find out more about how it works still, but let me come back to you, Doc. So you are an African, are you? And where do you come from? Where exactly in Africa?
Well, my ancestors were taken from Africa before it was chopped up into fragments, for lack of a better word.
Right.
So therefore I would claim all of Africa, and as a matter of fact, all of the African world. So I would see myself as connected to African people in Brazil, Cuba, India, Australia, all over the continent, Europe, wherever we may find ourselves. So that is my perspective, that I'm an African first before anything else.
Then it's for you, it's very important that we don't leave out our African values. But what does it take away from us when we go to the regular school and we have to learn from the Aristotles and the rest? What does it take from us?
Just as Mana was speaking about self-confidence, that a lot of this is done quite intentionally, that when you never see anything that looks like yourself, when you're told even up to the son of the supreme being is a white man, that all of these things, they have a psychological effect upon you. And there's a lot of research, African-centered psychology goes into this, that when you're taught, this mathematical theorem that was in use in Africa, they've named it after this Greek Pythagoras or Hippocrates, who he himself worshipped an African as being the progenitor of these ideas. But we're taught all of these things that Europeans did, so we don't see our face, we don't see our reflection. So what does that make us do? It says, we are not the ones who are good, we are not the ones who are intelligent. They even had a doll study for children 4 and 5 years old, where they said, okay, which doll, they had one is a white-looking doll, another one is a black-looking doll. Which doll is the intelligent doll? They said, it must be the white one, because I've been taught that everyone who did anything intelligent is white. Even today, someone was asking me, the computer must have been invented by a white man. I said, no, Dr. Mark Dean holds the majority of the patents. This is an African person. What about the internet? I mentioned Philip Ahmed Wiley, the domain name registration system, everything that the internet is based upon. All of these things are African people. I go into African inventors. Now, this is someone who has been through the university. That means he's finished. It means that at some point in time, you would think that he would get some of this type of information, but he didn't have it. So these are the assumptions that a full-grown adult has, based on always being taught that you've never done anything. So there's a quote that says, what we do for ourselves depends on what we know of ourselves. What we know of ourselves depends on what we have been told about ourselves. So if you've never been told anything about yourself, that you've never done anything right or good, then what would you do? If I want to be good, I have to aspire to be like these other people, even though it's not true, it's not the case. So this is where the psychological effects start to be visible, symptoms of this disease, this self-hatred disease that has come about. So that's where you would start seeing skin bleaching, that's where you'll start seeing the hair perming, all these things. You're trying to be what good is. Even, to go back to this picture that a lot of people say, oh, this is Jesus. This is Caesar Borgia. If you don't know that Pope Alexander commissioned Michelangelo, and he himself got one of his relatives to do this. But now we're worshiping Caesar Borgia from Italy and saying, oh, this is,
Jesus.
this is the only son of the supreme being. What does that do to your psychology? And this is where we come into self-hatred. And this goes into why we wouldn't necessarily, at least for me, wouldn't send my children to school, because a lot of the children who are there have already started to imbibe these concepts and have started to actualize self-hatred. So when they see another child who is African, they already know, oh, that means bad, just like the bad black doll. Here's another bad black child.
Right. So you have how many kids?
I have 2.
And you homeschool them.
Homeschool.
So the idea for you, where did it start?
Even from my own childhood, I wanted to be homeschooled. I mentioned some of these independent black institutions. And my parents, they were very much revolutionaries in their own rights. They decided to move away from the city of New York, Brooklyn, where I was born, down into the country to build their own house out of logs out in the country so they could have their own water source. If we're saying that we should be independent and free, how can you be independent and free and you're dependent on these same people who are destroying you to give you your water? So they dug their own well. We never had a furnace and all these things. We always chopped our own wood. So all of these things were ideas of we want to be free, we want to be independent. However, in the situation of New York, you have all of these institutions and schools that are available to make that happen. My oldest sister was able to take advantage of that. For us, because those schools weren't there, there was only up to the preschool level. And then from there, I myself ended up going into public school because my parents weren't able to do homeschooling as an option at that time. So in going in there, the first thing I'm told, you see my complexion. In the U.S., my complexion is considered to be quite dark. So people say, oh, you're so, here is like, oh, you're light. People say, oh, you're so black and blah, blah. And my name, I was born with the name Obadele. It means the king arrives at the house, Obadele. And this was a name that my parents gave me at birth so that I would realize my potential and see this is something that lets me know what my destiny should be. So at that point in time, the children are making fun of my name, making fun of my diet. We never celebrated all these white holidays, no Christmas, no Thanksgiving, all of these things. We never stood up to salute the flag, never sang the national anthem. So from a certain degree, we were a bit different. And my older sister had it a bit more difficult than even I did. But it caused, basically the source of it was that all these children have already been taught to hate themselves. And now I'm being put into this pool, so what do? They act out their aggression on me. And even at that young age of 5 and 6, I say, I want to know why these children hate themselves. So that ended up being my whole thing of trying to figure it out. So for us, now, myself and my wife, we decided that we wouldn't want to send our children into a situation like that, especially when you can provide them with an alternative that's much better. And for me, also, in terms of what cannot be provided, I homeschool my daughter in Chi. So that includes science, that includes mathematics, astronomy.
So and that's for you, all the subjects are coming up. But
Right.
what about a parent who's not good at all the other subjects? What happens?
Well, that's why we even have a homeschool collective. So like the parents who are in the collective, they come to me for Chi. So Mana's boys were in the Chi class, Miguel, and it's a collective. So any place that we feel like we are not strong, we can call on other parents in the collective. And this is community. This is what we were doing as African people before we were basically bowled over by these Eurasians who decided to do things that weren't in our best interest. So we are basically returning back to something that's logical and sensible, as opposed to what everyone is doing without really giving it much thought.
Of course, the idea sounds really good, but this doesn't come without challenges. Mana, for you, you at a point had to stop working. How can you make other people understand that you can actually do stuff like that? There are people who aren't bold enough to stop working, take charge of their lives, and do things like that. What happens to people who cannot take that step?
Okay, because I did it with the help of a teacher. When at a point I realized I couldn't do both, I took in a teacher, but then under my guidance, right? And until recently, I realized that some parents actually homeschool in the night after they've gone to work and come back. You know, so whatever they want to teach their children, they do that. You know, and in this day of the internet, you know, you can research information, and you can set it where even when you are not there, the children, you know, can still be learning. You know, my children go on the internet themselves, you know, to find out information. Like they go to homeschooling sites, there are curriculums, there are programs. So they do it themselves to the extent that even my 3-year-old, you know, can go on the internet and know that when I click this button and I click that, I'll get stuff that is for me.
But there is also material on the internet that is not, of course, that children should not be consuming.
Yeah, we have.
The internet has been known for
technology is like
know,
that.
bullying,
You
all
can
kinds of
block.
things.
You can block
Right.
things.
So how do you yeah. Okay, so you block
You
those
have
sites.
blocked those sites, so they don't have access to any other sites but educational sites. Yeah.
But how does the curriculum itself work? Is it a structured one, or it depends on you and your family? How does it work?
With me, we have access to some curriculums on the internet, and we pick and choose, you know, which one we want them to learn. Because sometimes, mostly, certain things are so unnecessary. Because when we look at what education and schooling is, it's about learning a skill, you know, but you know, with critical thinking, you know, either scientifically or whatever. At the end of the day, you should be able to survive with that knowledge and information you have. So if you are a PhD holder and you've gone through whatever, and so you cannot put your critical thinking into being and make your environment survivable, then you have not learned anything. You are not educated. That is how I see it. So you should be able to acquire skill that will enable you live in your social environment. So I can pick and choose what I want my child to learn. In
So,
this
Mana,
sense,
up to what age would you homeschool your children?
I'm not thinking of stopping at whatever age. You know, so
Particular age.
at any
So what happens when, like, during the times when the those who are attending regular school are writing the external exams, like the BEC, the SSCE? How does it work
Yeah,
with you?
with the home center school, we somehow don't believe too much on exams. You know, writing and passing exams. We believe in, you know, acquiring knowledge. That's our practical, because we have, even for example in our country here in Ghana, we have so many people who are so-called educated, but we have so many problems around us that are so basic that they cannot even solve. So what kind of education do they acquire?
So you do not
What do
necessarily
they-
have exams,
They do test. You know, they test what.
and who
they
sets the
learn.
questions?
Yeah, there's the curriculum. You know, so if you've taught the children up to this day,
Follows a certain-
you test them on what they have learned. You know, and they are supposed to be able to think critically, you know, to solve problems. So if they teach you 1 + 1 = 2, you just don't take it. You know, you have to put it into practice. So if I'm to create this table, I will have to use measurements. So put that 1 + 1 = 2 into, you know, your measurement, but not just learning it for learning's sake, so that if they should ask you 1 + 1 is equal to 2, but then what is it used for? You don't know.
Okay, Doc, you have a PhD, and it's my thinking that in a world where we look out for certificates, like the BCE, the SSCE, the university certificate and all that, what happens
This is a good
for
question.
your children?
I have a friend of the family who she homeschooled her daughter throughout, and then when the daughter decided that she wanted to go to university, all she had to do was take that exam, and was entered into the university. There's another example, Ajua Safo, who's now MP.
The youngest lawyer.
Youngest lawyer. So one of the things that you find is that your children are so far beyond what the exam is even testing. I'll give you an example. My daughter is 6. At the time she was 5, and we were doing algebra. Now how are we doing algebra? Because she knows how to play ORE. So anytime you have to solve for how many do you need in order to get to this whole, how many do you need before there are 3? We're doing the adult version now, about 5.
Right.
So how many do you need before there's 3 in here? So then I decided, okay, well, let's see if she can convert that information into, let's write it on the board. So we started doing algebra. All right, if you have 10 multiplied by what would give you 20, she would just put 2. And I just started laughing. And she said, why are you laughing? I said, because there are some people who think that this is difficult. And she started laughing too. She thought it was so ridiculous that people would think something like this is difficult. And for the testing and the assessments, I would rather say assessments, because when it's homeschooling, and for me I even can say world schooling, because you don't have to quit your job. Me, I take my daughter to the office, and they're very, she's more popular there than I am. And they greet her at the same, hey! She'll count to 100 for everyone. They clap for her and give her free kwedu or whatever. So, with this type of thing, we can just be in the car, and I would say, so 10 times 2 is how much, and then she would give me the answer. And say, so, but what does it mean? Actually say, that means that there's 10 here, and there's 10, so she can understand what it is as opposed to just write on the board, and then she does it by rote. So the assessments are all the time. Sometimes I don't take her. My wife is the one who does the schooling at the house. And at that time, I will come in, we'll read through a book, and then I'll have her answer the questions that show that she really understands it, or I'll have her put it in her own words. Even, she has a website, Kambon.com, and on it, she goes through different recipes using fruits and vegetables and all of these things. And it's videos of her doing this. And for the composition, she writes the whole thing herself in Chi. Then she'll write the translation. Even the text that's on the site right now is what she wrote herself about why she's homeschooling and all these different things that she's learning. So when we have a more broad and open-minded view, we realize that there's a book called Too Much Schooling, Too Little Education. And sometimes we mix the two up. You're just going to school, sitting there, sitting there, sitting there. But what is it really doing for you? Edusere is the root, which means to bring out this type of light.
What about just allowing your children to go through regular school and then finding a way to add on, to what they've learned at school with what you have?
This would be.
What about that?
There's a book called The Miseducation of the Negro, and one of the basic premises is that in going to the schooling system, you get so much misinformation and miseducation that if that is your foundation, you have to deconstruct so much of that in order to even start to get at the core that can be built upon. And going back into history and the lack of history that I gave you the example before, university students who don't, they know all of this misinformation and all of this miseducation, but they don't know actual real facts. So that would be a problem, because you can get into a point where there's conflicting information, where you are telling them something that's based on facts and they're telling you something that's out of a textbook, and that can be a major issue. So we wouldn't want to subject them, or I would say abuse them with the standard education system, which is designed to keep them in the position of oppression.
I had an incident with some of the teachers that comes where when they come, my children are like, okay, so do you know your history? Do you know Harriet Tubman? You know, they ask them these questions and the teacher was like, what are you talking about? It's like, you don't know Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman was a slave who helped other slaves to run away in the U.S. and the teacher would be like, okay, so where did you learn that from? It's like they have no idea. And before I even took them on, I didn't know so many of these things. I'm still learning because, I still don't know so many things. And I have, I got to the tertiary institution. You learn so much about others and not yourself. And when you don't know yourself, you are not going anywhere, because then you are always in the tracks of other people's image, My son is 9 years and he's able to do so much.
Is that the first son?
The first son. As I speak with you, he's completed IPFC with a certificate. And when I took him, they were actually laughing. They're like,
yes,
are you
that's
crazy?
Quite impressive.
Yeah, are you crazy? He was 8 then. How could you bring an 8-year-old here? Here is a tertiary institution. It's SS people who come here. So I said, hey, you give him a chance, let him be amongst them. If he's not able to, I will pull him out. But he went there and he was teaching them, so I'll go to the school and the teacher will say, today I had to even leave him for them. Yeah, so I see him doing so well. And like I told you, I said, even if somebody came to me from the best of schools, wherever, and told me that, let your child come to this school for free, I wouldn't. Because, looking at him, he's come so far. So why will I, want to truncate all that? Sometimes people ask me, like, is it that you can't pay for school?
Right.
Why do you want to put the children at home? They rather think that I'm abusing them. And I tell them
you're
that
being unfair.
I'm being unfair. And I tell them that if you should bring your child, at whatever level, okay, maybe between ages from maybe 10 to 15, who are in regular school, against my child, in terms of knowledge, they cannot attend.
So where does the difference come? Is it the curriculum that is richer?
Yeah, because it's not restricted.
Are you coming?
Yeah. The curriculum can be it, but one of the things is, like, some of the best schools in the world, they boast about their smaller class sizes. And why do they do that? Because you can tailor things to the individual student as opposed to like an assembly line type of thing. Everyone shout out loud, 2 + 2 = 4. The ones who may already have that, they're subjected to basically being pulled back. The ones who may not have that, there can be what's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is, what Mana is saying, they're saying the child may have a learning disability. That in those cases, the teacher may say, this child is slow, and just put them off into the corner. They have a very formalized system for that in the U.S. called special education.
Exactly.
They just pump them full of drugs, Ritalin, put them in the corner, and get them ready for prison. Because that itself is an industry. They need new people coming in all the time to get money from it. Otherwise, the judge and lawyer and everyone else will be out of work. But when we look at the curricula, we can say, okay, my daughter, I know that she knows these things. My son, I know that he knows these things. Therefore, we can move forward. At the same time, you can be doing constant assessments. Like I said, even in the car, I'll be giving her assessments about this thing. If she does well on it, I say, okay, I know that she's gotten up to this point. Right. So basically, one of the things that's more enriching is that you can tailor every single thing. And you can also look at what should, in my view, my child know at this age. So if at that age I may have known about dinosaurs, solar system, all these different things, then I can incorporate that in. And we have lots of documentaries. I have a 3 terabyte hard drive, which is just nothing but documentary. So as we're doing that, she's getting exposed to the information, and then we'll discuss it in Chi. She'll write a paper about it. We went to Safo Kantanka's place about inventors. We went to the Air Force to see, look, here are people who look just like me who are running the airplanes and everything. And that's not anything amazing to her. It's like, oh yes, of course, that's what we should be doing. What else would we do?
Right.
As opposed to coming from the U.S.,
Right.
you rarely see a black aviator, and it's like, something that's weird. For her, she's already being exposed to there's no limit to what you should be able to do.
I want to know what it takes to really succeed at homeschooling your children. I will take a break. You're watching Women's Voice here on GBC 24. Today, we're looking at homeschooling as an alternative to the regular school system. My guest with me today, Mana Teki Myers. She is a herbal therapist and CEO of H&H Solutions East Legon. And I also have Dr. Obadele Kambon, a research fellow at the Literature and Drama section of the Institute of African Studies, University of Legon. We'll take a break. Do stay with us. The conversation will continue right after this. You're welcome back, and thanks for staying with us here on Women's Voice as we discuss homeschooling as an alternative to the regular school system. My guest with me here, Mana Teki Myers. She is a herbal therapist and CEO of H&H Solutions at East Legon, and Dr. Obadele Kambon, a research fellow at the Language, Literature and Drama section of the Institute of African Studies, University of Legon. So you were talking earlier on before we went on the break, you're talking about how it works. But what does it take really to succeed? Is it a committed parent? Is it the environment? What does it take to succeed at homeschooling?
This is, I would say, another major factor is that those who take the decision to take responsibility for their children's education, usually these tend to be parents who have some level of conviction and commitment to doing what is right for their child, as opposed to sometimes you get status symbol schools that I just send my child here because it costs $20,000 US or $30,000 US, more than the college I went to in the US. But when you go there and you say, okay, what are you actually learning there? Another homeschooled child went to one of these schools to compete in the spelling bee and blew everyone out of the water because it's not about what they're learning, it's just to send them there. So when you have a parent who has this level of conviction and commitment, she said that no matter what school they said, we will let you go here for free, she wouldn't do it. Myself, if you put me at gunpoint and say, oh, send you, I would not do it, especially when we know what the results are, when we see those who have gone through this entire system, what do they know, what is their worldview, what is their understanding of themselves and their place in the world. And when that answer isn't affirmative, it's not positive, you have to do something different. So once you take that step, I would say the only way to find something is to start looking for it. So if you are looking for resources or ways to teach your child, you'll only start to do that when you say, I have to take the responsibility. So then you'll find yourself looking for documentaries, for websites to support, for videos, for all types of multimedia, for other activities, going swimming, doing African martial arts, which I also teach. All of these things. So now that we even have this as a goal, we have to have that first before we can start to meet the goal on any type of level. So I would say that's one of the major ingredients to successfully homeschool.
But when you yourself as a parent, you probably have a job that takes you all day and you cannot have the time. How can you make it work, Mana?
I realize that most parents now are looking for money to send their children to school.
Both parents are working.
Yeah, they want to send their children to school. But then they are not looking at, okay, what I want this child to become. You know, they just want to send their children somewhere that, okay, go here so that I can, go and make money and all of that. And you realize that some parents are even losing their children to the extent that they have little time with their children. They leave very early. The children don't see them leaving. They come home very late, and the children are left in the care of house helps and nannies. So it's the teacher and the nanny who is bringing up your child. It's not you, because I think the only time you spend with your child is either weekends, and so what are you imparting on your children? Before you realize, someone else have put into your children what they think your child should know. For example, I teach my children about Christ, and I teach them from my perspective that Christ is a black man. And so if I'm teaching my children this in the house, and I'm sending my children to school, and the teacher there is telling them about this white Jesus and all this, it's very conflicting. At the end of the day, my child might decide to choose what the teacher is saying over mine.
When children do trust their teachers a lot.
Of course, so they come, and sometimes even some of the teachers that I invite home, even though I warn them from beginning that when it comes to religion, don't even go there. Leave that for me. You still find them, telling them things, and the children come back to you like, oh, my teacher said that, and my teacher said that. So, hey, mommy, I think
So what you're saying is, you if you can't do it all on your own, you get the teachers, but you have to be just as involved.
Yes, you have to be part of it. So you instruct the teacher what to do, what to teach your children, because we have to be very realistic here. Some parents can actually not. They won't actually, commit their time to, stopping work to stay home, or taking their children to work, because some people's work will not even tolerate their children coming around. So you can then, find a teacher. I school the teachers myself when they come. I school them. I take them through everything and tell them that, okay, this is what we are going to learn today, or we are going to teach the children today, and so you don't go outside of that.
Dr. Kambon, there are some rules that guide, a child being in a regular school. I mean, you're talking about the break periods and all of that, and, with homeschooling, do you adhere to certain strict regulations, or the children are just free to do whatever?
And this is a very good question. We really look at discipline as one of the reasons why we would homeschool in the first place. That when you send your child off to any type of institution, you don't know what type of playmates they may come around and what they may be influencing them with. So as we are teaching our children at home, discipline is one of the major things that we want to instill. If this happens, do you just cry and say, I want it? No. And we have very strict ways of, getting that message through. So it's not this type of unstructured free-for-all. That's even that level of structure is the reason why we would homeschool. Rather, we really want to make sure that the child has good social skills. And again, that also comes up with the homeschool collective. When you have people who have similar values, you have people who have similar orientations and goals, then you can have some level of unity of action and say, let's all come together and do these things together.
Yeah, there's also the situation where when your children go to the regular school, they have this peer pressure. They have all kinds of influences that you can never control.
But there's also something people say that a school environment does to a child. You talk about socialization and all of that. Mm-hmm. What about that?
The homeschool child is never left behind when it comes to socialization, because
so the homeschool child is not isolated.
Not at all. You have family. You take your children to family. You take your children to friends. You take them to parks. You take them to playgrounds. You go to church. They with the regular church goers, they take their children. They are in Sunday school. They interact with children, so they don't necessarily have to be with schoolmates before. And as a collective, we have activities that we bring the children together.
So that is where the collectivity comes in.
Yes. So we have they have a football team now. We have swimming lessons. We have some dance lessons as well.
So do you ever school them together?
Yes.
For lots of the activities, the field trips are together, the individual classes are together. I mentioned we had a tree class that ended about a month ago or so, where all of the children are together. And sometimes it's those who are homeschooled and those who are going to regular school who say, we just want to take part in this activity that you are doing. So once they learn about the activity, the children are all interacting together. And it really, there are lots of different ways that they can socialize. Also with having family in other parts of the world, they can be online, live video calling. And what people, especially here, they tend to be blown away by, all right, look at how articulate this child is. how can you be this age, but you know how to do this, you know how to say this. So they're socializing not only with people their own age, but they're socializing with adults with all ages and all ranges.
So the perception that a homeschool child is isolated, is alone, and all of that is completely wrong.
It's wrong because they fit. Every time you put them with, you know, regular children from wherever, they fit. They are able to interact. You know, they don't feel inferior against them, or they are.
I would say they even tend to be the star of the show. Everyone wants to talk to them.
Right. Right. So what benefits, for instance, do parents stand to gain? Parents who homeschool their children, what benefits do you stand to gain?
You have the ability to bring up your child the way you want, without control, without any outside influence. You know, so you have a well-rounded child, you know, well-behaved, because they don't learn any other thing outside of what you are telling them. You know, so you don't have any child having to curse bad words. You know, with my children, if you say certain words, it's like, what is that? You know, it's like another word. They don't even know what it is because they don't get to interact with any other child who is influencing them.
And that is for your home typically, and a few other homes, or his home. But what about in homes where you don't get substance actually coming from? There are homes where children they don't feel welcomed at home. At home, there are all kinds of things going on. There's violence and all of that. And it's only in school where the children get to get some solace or some contact with the world that's actually real. What happens in those cases?
I don't think in school there is any world that is real. I think it's even more harsher. For example,
what if you don't come from a good home?
Yeah, I mean, then it means you have you have two problems to face, because then it means you are receiving it at home and receiving it at school. Because when I was going to school, I told Obadele earlier that I had children bully me because of my height, my nose and my lips, and I almost grew up feeling inferior about myself. I used to actually walk and look down because I felt I was too tall. I used to feel like my lips were too big, that, you know, I wouldn't talk, you know, and this was all as a result of bullying. You see, so if you say, okay, the school is so conducive, it's not.
What if you're being bullied at home?
Then it means you have two problems.
Different problems that you want to deal with.
Right, okay, so just to round up, for people who have been listening all this while and they're thinking, wow, this is a great idea, how do you even start to go about it if you're a parent and you desire to homeschool your children? Doc?
Really, the first step is taking the decision that this is what you're going to do. And in Ghana in particular, it may be a difficult decision because of social pressure. Things are not necessarily done based on what is logical. Things are not necessarily done based on what is sensible. Things are done with the whole crowd is going this direction. Whether it's off the cliff, whether it's into a fire, let's all go into it. So, one, you would definitely have to have some level of resolve and conviction that what I'm doing is the right thing for my child and it's the right thing for this family. Once you have that level of conviction, then you would just prepare for it. Because most of my family is in agreement with it in terms of my close nuclear family, and then also they are not into a lot of these things that others are into, I really don't have that challenge, but I know that would be definitely a reality here in Ghana for most people who have these strong family ties, expectations of what the child is going to do. But I'll give you an example. Mana was talking about like having locks or natural hair. That's actually something that's becoming more and more popular. Before I lived at Adenta, I could drive from Adenta to Legon and not see anyone with their own hair. Everyone has hair that looks like it came from grass cutter or horse or something. So,
or hair that looks like mine.
I wouldn't say that. I put you in a mirror. But on the way, I would never see it. But over time, I remember hearing this one show on Asempa FM, and people were calling in the memo saying, we don't actually like this, you know, this isn't something that we find to be desirable. I don't know if that was such a popular program, but after that I noticed that on the drive I would see two 3, 4 who have natural hair.
Okay, I'll take that as your final
Yes,
comment.
okay.
Mana, advice to parents who are contemplating, homeschooling their children.
Yeah, I would encourage parents to homeschool their children because the results is great. There's nothing compared to, I actually told my son, and I told him that if you ever have to go to school, you're going to MIT, you're going to Harvard, and you are going at age 15. And he's like, yes, mom, because he's very confident and he knows he can do it. Because then you prepare the child, towards that goal, and you encourage them. At home, there's nothing like you can't. We don't use the word we can't. We can. Everything you can do it, and so you are like the cheerleader for them. You encourage them, you tell them, even when they are not getting it, it's like, oh yeah, you are there, try harder and all of that, and you get. But at school, they compare the children, the ones who they claim they are average. There's nothing like average. Everybody and what they are capable of doing. So you can compare another child to another child and
the
say,
moral aspect as well.
yes, you say, oh, this one is more intelligent, this one is average, this one is down there. No, because everybody and their ability. You can have a child who is not good at maths, but he's very good at singing. Push that child, let that child know that this is my gift, and I can work at it and I can still learn other things along. If your child is good at whatever, push them and don't look on them like, oh, okay, look at these ones, they are getting hundreds and you are getting 0. Even if you're getting 0, you tell the child that, okay, you can also do this and do it better. The others can't, so you encourage them all the time. So I will encourage mothers, take a bold step. You can even do it after work. Come home and take it on yourself. I had a friend who schools their child at one of these biggest school. And he sees my children, he comes to the house, he looks on their board and is like, oh, is this one doing that? So how come my child